Well, good evening. Pastor Rod Nichols here. Welcome to my weekly live teaching. Excited that you're here, either live or watching the replay. So each week I am here live talking about how to live the abundant life. Now, for those of you who don't know me, I'm again Pastor Rod Nichols, the executive pastor at AZ Vineyard Church in Goodyear, Arizona. I'm also the author of the book True Disciple and founder of the True Disciple Academy. So, my calling is to equip the body of Christ to preach the gospel, make disciples, take care of those in need, and live the abundant life. This week, I'm going to be talking about getting out of the boat and doing something amazing. So let's go to Mark 6, 45 through 51, and look at the story of Jesus walking on water. What an amazing, amazing story that is. So, again, Mark 6, 45 through 51, if you're following along with me in your own Bible. Verse 45, immediately Jesus made his disciples get into the boat and go on ahead of him to Bethsaida while he dismissed the crowd. So they had just he had just ministered to a very large group of people and was now dismissing the disciples and insisting that they go on ahead of him. Now, this is pretty unusual because we don't see this very often. We see them traveling together. So, there's clearly a reason here, and we see it in verse 46. After leaving them, he went up on a mountainside to pray. So he needed some recharge time. He needed some time with the Father to, I believe, find out what was next. What were they going to be doing next? Verse 47 says, later that night, and when you study it out, it was actually about 3 o'clock in the morning, the boat was in the middle of the lake, and he was alone on the land. So the disciples in the boat were in the middle of the lake, and he's up on the land. He saw the disciples straining at the oars because the wind was against them. Now, this is 3 o'clock in the morning. We know that it's really dark at 3 o'clock in the morning, so there's no way that he could have seen them with his human eyes. He was seeing them in the spirit here. And then it goes on, it says, and they were struggling against the wind, so there was obviously kind of a storm going on of some kind. Shortly after dawn, he went out to them walking on the lake. Wow, how amazing is that? He was about to pass them, but when they saw him walking on the lake, they thought it was a ghost. They thought he was a ghost. So my theory on this is that just as when Moses got alone with God up on the mountain, and he came back down, he was glowing because he'd been in the glory of God. I think Jesus was in the glory of God up on the hillside, and so he was glowing like Moses did, like he was when he was transfigured. And they're looking out at the water and they're seeing this glowing thing, and they think it's a ghost. They cried out because they all saw him and were terrified. Immediately he spoke to them and said, "Take courage, it is I, don't be afraid." Then he climbed into the boat with them, and the wind died down, and they were completely amazed. I guess so. You just watched him walk across on the water, and then he gets on the boat, and the wind just completely dies down. And we know from another situation where they were in a boat, and there was a huge storm, and the disciples were freaking out, and Jesus was sleeping in the back of the boat. He was totally at peace, and he gets up and he rebukes the wind and the waves, and everything calms down. So we know that when he spoke, he had power over nature. Now I want to look at this account in Matthew 14, 28 through 33, because it adds an entire another piece of the picture here. So again, Matthew 14:28-33, Lord, if it's you, Peter replied, tell me to come to you on the water. So this is the point when they see Jesus, they think he's a ghost. They freak out. He says, I'm Jesus. Don't be afraid. And now Peter says, Lord, if it's you, tell me to come to you on the water. And Jesus says, come. Then Peter got down out of the boat, walked on the water, and came toward Jesus. Now, this is a really amazing thing when you think about who Peter was, because Peter was a lifetime fisherman. He was most likely part of a family who had always been fishermen. So as a professional fisherman, he would know in the middle of a storm, you stay in the boat. You don't get out of the boat. But because he had such faith in Jesus that when Jesus said, come, he gets out of the boat and he begins walking on water toward Jesus. Now, we don't know how far he walked, but I have the sense that he walked a good amount. It wasn't like he walked a couple of steps and then that was it. I think he went a little ways out there, because it doesn't appear that Jesus was close to the boat when they saw him, because otherwise they probably would have seen that it was Jesus. Then verse 30 says, but when he saw the wind, he was afraid, and beginning to sink, cried out, Lord, save me. So as long as he had his eyes fixed on Jesus, he was walking on water. He was defying gravity. He was doing something that was amazing, something that no one but Jesus has ever done. And then he got his eyes off of Jesus and he got his eyes on the wind, probably some waves, because the wind would have driven up the waves. And he got scared and lost his faith. Fear took over and he began to sink. But he cried out, Lord, save me. And it says in verse 31, immediately Jesus reached out his hand and caught him. And he says, you of little faith, why did you doubt? Now, we always take that as a negative, but if you think about it, Peter, with little faith, we don't know how much faith that was. Maybe it was the mustard seed size of faith that Jesus talked about before. But he walked on water. He did the impossible. He did something that was amazing with a little bit of faith. And it was doubt that caused him to sink. His faith caused him to walk on water, and doubt caused him to sink. How often does that happen with us? How often do we get on the right path with Jesus and we've got our eyes on him and our focus is on him and our faith is strong, and then something comes against us, we get our eyes off of him and fear comes in and we begin to doubt and we begin to sink and we call out, Lord, save me, and Jesus is always right there to grab us and save us. Verse 32, and when they climbed into the boat, the wind died down. Then those who were in the boat worshiped him, saying, truly you are the Son of God. So the boat in this story represents a comfort zone. Peter's the only one who got out of the boat. He was the only one who had enough faith to say, Jesus, if that's you, Lord, if that's you, bid me come to you. All of the rest of them stayed in the boat in fear. But Peter had enough faith to get out of the boat and walk on water. The rest of them stayed in their comfort zone. So the question is, what is your boat? What is your comfort zone? Is it your job? Is it a business? Is it your financial portfolio? Maybe it's an addiction. All kinds of addictions out there. We always, when we think of addiction, we think of alcohol or drugs or pornography, sex, things like that. But, what about food? What about social media? What about cell phones? There's even addiction to exercise, where people exercise too much. So, you have to take a look at what comfort zone are you in that's keeping you from stepping out and doing something amazing. What seemingly impossible thing is God calling you to do? Maybe you already know. Maybe it's to go into full-time ministry. Maybe it's to launch a new business. Maybe it's an invention you've had in mind. Maybe it's a new app or a new website. Maybe it's a book. Maybe God has called you to write and publish a book, and you're thinking it's impossible. There's no way I could do that. And on your own, that's true. But that's the difference between Peter and the rest of the disciples. Was on their own, they stayed in the boat. But with Jesus, Peter got out of the boat and did the impossible. So Jesus right now is saying to all of us, come, come, come out of the boat. Do the impossible. Do something amazing. Now, there's three things that'll keep you in the boat. The first is fear. We talked about that, and that's what the other disciples were dealing with. Maybe for them it was a fear of their life, fear of dying, probably. For you, it might be a fear of failure. It might be a fear of success. Maybe you're afraid of what success might look like in your life. Maybe it's a fear of what other people might think of you if you stepped out. Now, fear and faith are opposites. So we see those opposites in the boat. We see fear in the boat and faith out of the boat. You can't walk in faith and fear at the same time. Faith is God's building block. It's the way that he gets things done through us. Fear is the way Satan stops us from accomplishing the things that God has intended for us. Now, fear, there's two types of fear. There's the natural fear where, if you're out camping and a bear or a mountain lion comes into your camp, your fear is there for either fight or flight to preserve your life. And that's a good kind of fear. But then there's a false type of fear. And I like using the acronym for fear as false expectations appearing real, because that's this fake kind of fear. It's a pretension that Satan tries to get you to buy into, or maybe you've bought into it before, and so it's a natural fallback for you. But it's a false expectation appearing real. In other words, you begin in your mind to think through the things that could happen, and then you allow that to stop you from actually stepping out and doing what God intended you to do. Now, none of those things have actually happened. They're all false expectations. You could have a different kind of expectation. You could expect that when you stepped out of the boat with whatever this is that God's calling you to do, that amazing things begin to happen, that he begins to connect you with all the right people, that he brings the money that you need. He brings the wisdom that you need. All the things that you don't think you have right now, you can get those through God, because all things are possible through him. So when you begin to think about stepping out of the boat and fear tries to come in, reframe that. Start to change your expectations. Change your expectations to what could happen that's good. If God is in it, then who can be against you? So if God's for you, then you're going to be able to move forward even when it doesn't seem possible. The old song, God will make a way where there doesn't seem to be any way. Well, this is the case here. 2 Corinthians 10, 4-5 says, the weapons we fight with are not the weapons of the world. On the contrary, they have divine power to demolish strongholds. We demolish strongholds and every pretension that sets itself up against the knowledge of God. And we take captive every thought to make it obedient to Christ. So here's the key, is we take captive those negative thoughts and we submit them to Jesus. We say, Jesus, this isn't a thought from you, so remove this thought from me. And we move on with the thoughts that come from him. Now, the second thing that could stop you is comfort. In other words, you feel like you have too much to lose. In Matthew 19:20, we see the rich young ruler, and his wealth got in the way of salvation. He wanted to know, what do I need to do, Jesus, to get eternal life? And Jesus told him what to do. He told him to sell everything he had and give it to the poor and then follow him. Now, that's not the way to salvation. The way to salvation is obviously through Jesus. So So, you don't have to sell everything you have in order to be saved. That's just what he told this rich young ruler, because he knew that that was what was standing between him and his eternal salvation. So sometimes that's the case. Sometimes it's money that gets in the way. Sometimes your comfort is in your money. Your comfort is in your job. Your comfort is in whatever boat you've created here. So if that's keeping you from accomplishing what God wants you to accomplish, then you got to get out of the comfort zone. You got to get out of the boat. You got to be able to step out and even if there's some fear there, just do it in fear. Number three, the third thing that can stop you from getting out of the boat is doubt or unbelief. And we saw that in Peter, that he was fine as long as he had his eyes focused on Jesus and he was moving forward. But soon as he allowed doubt to come in, that's when he began to sink. So if you begin to walk out there and you're not totally convinced that God is really going to come through, then doubt could come in there. And Jesus said to Peter, "Why did you doubt me? Why did you doubt me?" So it's not just why did you doubt, but why did you doubt me? And that when Jesus calls us and he says, come, or he says, do this thing that he's calling you to do, then if you don't do that, you're doubting him. There's an old movie, Something the Lord Made. It's a good movie, a little bit rough in parts. Some of the language is a little bit rough, but Dr. Alfred Blalock was the first person to perform open heart surgery on a baby in the 1940s. And everyone had said it couldn't be done. And yet he had the faith to do it. Now doctors perform approximately 1.7 million heart surgeries every year, because we had people that were willing to get out of the boat and do something different. And we know all the great inventions, all the great businesses, all the great ministries, all the great things that have ever been done is because someone was willing to get out of the boat. So what are the advantages of getting out of the boat? Well, first of all, that's where Jesus is. He was outside the boat. He wasn't in the boat. Peter got out of the boat because he wanted to be where his master was. Don't you? Don't you want to be where Jesus is? I mean, that's the safe place. That's the best place. It's not always the most comfortable place, and it's not that nothing will ever go wrong, but I'd certainly rather be with Jesus in the middle of a storm than I would without him. Number two, you get to do impossible things. Jesus walked on water. What might you do? What impossible thing, what amazing thing might you do? And the cool thing is, if you fall, Jesus is right there and he'll pick you up and you get to do it again. You've got another chance to be able to do that again. I happen to believe that Peter walked quite a few steps out to Jesus, began to sink. Jesus picked him up and they walked back on top of the water. He didn't swim back. He walked back. So he got to walk on water twice, on the way out there and on the way back. So at this point, you've got a choice. You can stay in your boat where you think it's safe and comfortable and miss out on a water walking experience, an opportunity to do something amazing, something that you may even think is impossible. Other people may think is impossible as well. Second, you get to take a chance and get out of the boat. It changed Peter's life. That faith was what took him on to be the apostle that he was. And it'll change your life too. Well, that's it for this week. If you're watching on Facebook, I'd really like it if you would like this and comment on it, so more people get a chance to see the message. If you're watching this on YouTube, give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel so you get notified next week when I post, or just come be live with me either on Facebook or YouTube every Wednesday at 6 p.m. Pacific time. Also, if you're interested in learning more about the True Disciple book or the True Disciple Academy, you can go to truedisciple.info and all the information is there. Well, I hope to see you next week. It's time to get out of the boat and have a great water walking experience and go do the amazing.